All right, this lesson is going to be over the half angle formulas. All right, so there they are. So the sine and cosine formulas for half angles, there's a plus and a minus there. It's only going to be one or the other. So it tells you on here the signs of those depend on what quadrant that angle is in half of U. So before we determine, we're not going to put plus or minus on any of these. It's going to be one or the others depending on what quadrant we're in. So on example 1, we're going to use the half angle formulas to find the exact values of the sine, cosine, and tangent of the angle. Okay, and our angle, for example 1, is 165 degrees. Now, 165 degrees is not special. So without this formula, we wouldn't be able to find the exact value of the sine, cosine, and tangent of it. So first, I'm going to figure out what quadrant 165 degrees is in. So because 165 degrees falls between 90 degrees and 180 degrees, it is in quadrant 2. All right, then we need to figure out what special angle we take half of, and it gives us 165 degrees. So that's not hard to do mathematically. You would just take it and multiply it by 2, and that's 330 degrees. So 165 degrees is half of 330 degrees. So what that means is, in our formula, U is going to be 330 degrees. All right, so let's start with the sine of 165 degrees. That's going to be the same as the sine of 330 degrees divided by 2, so half of 330 degrees. All right, so then I'm going to take my formula, the first sine of half an angle, and I'm going to put 330 degrees in for U. Now I need to know if I do the positive or negative square root. So in quadrant 2, sine is positive, so it's going to be the positive square root. And then under there we're going to have a fraction of 1 minus cosine of 330 degrees over 2. Okay. So then we need to figure out the cosine of 330 degrees. So that is going to take some time. 330 degrees is in quadrant 4. So in quadrant 4, cosine is positive. So it's going to be a positive value. And then we also need to know the reference angle. So the reference angle for 330 degrees is going to be 360 minus 330, or 30 degrees. So the reference angles, you either use subtraction with 360 degrees or subtraction with 180 degrees. And so if it's an angle that's in quadrant 4, you use 360 degrees. If it's in any other quadrant, you use 180 degrees. All right, so we would use our 30-degree finger. And then to find the cosine, we do the square root of the top fingers over 2. So it's going to be the square root of 3 over 2. Now, keep in mind, this minus dropped down. All right, so it's minus and then the positive square root of 3 over 2. All right, then we don't want to have this fraction inside of a fraction. So whatever that denominator is right there, we're going to multiply by it. All right, so we have the square root of, go ahead and distribute that on the numerator. All right, and then we have the square root of, multiply that in the denominator. All right, so this is going to be kind of a strange answer. But we'll go ahead and take the square root of 4. So that is the exact value of the sine of 165 degrees. Now, if you wanted to double check on a calculator, make sure you're in degree mode. And we would find the sine of 165. It's going to be some horrible decimal. And then if I do type in the answer, oh, I typed that in wrong, sorry. It should be over 2. All right, I get that same ugly decimal. Now, that square root under a square root always makes students nervous, but there's nothing we can do about that. That is the answer. There's no rule that tells you you can't have a square root under a square root. So it's fine. Okay, so now we're going to do the cosine of 165 degrees. And we've already figured some things out. So that might make this a little easier for us now that we know some things about 165 degrees. All right, so the cosine of 165 degrees is going to be equal to the cosine of 330 degrees divided by 2. So we'll use our cosine of half u formula. Now we have to decide if we do the positive or the negative square root. Now, because 165 is in quadrant 2, the cosine is negative. So we do the negative square root. Right? And then we have 1 plus the cosine of 330 degrees over 2. Now, we've already figured out the cosine of 330 degrees. So we have some of the work is already done for us. It's the square root of 3 over 2. All right. And then just like before, we don't want that fraction inside of a fraction. So I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2. And then this is where I break it apart. So I'll distribute that 2 in the numerator and then multiply it in the denominator. So my final answer for the cosine of 165 degrees is the negative square root of 2 plus the square root of 3 over just regular 2. Okay, and then we'll find the tangent of 165 degrees. That's the same as the tangent of 330 degrees over 2. So we'll use either one of the tangent formulas for 330 degrees. It honestly does not matter. So I'm just going to use the first one. So it's going to be 1 minus the cosine of 330 degrees over the sine of 330 degrees. Now, in this case, I wouldn't do the sine of 165 over the cosine of 165 degrees. That just had the radicals just do weird things. It's easier to use the formula in this case. All right, so we've already figured out twice that the cosine of 330 degrees is the square root of 3 over 2. All right, the sine, 330 degrees is in quadrant 4, so the sine is negative. And then it's the 30-degree finger, so it's 1/2. So negative 1/2 in the denominator. All right, so we'll take our numerator and multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator. It looks like we're going to get negative 2 plus the square root of 3 is the tangent of 165 degrees. All right, so that's how you use the half angle formulas to find the exact value of an angle that's half of a special angle. Okay. We're also going to use it with the triangle situation that we've been doing for each one of these formulas. So on example 2, we're going to do two things. The first thing we're going to do is determine the quadrant in which U over 2 lies. All right, then we're going to find the exact value of, and we're just, this one we're just going to do 1. We're going to find the sine of U over 2. Okay, and we're still working with the problem stuff that's given to us. What we're given is that the sine of U is negative 3/5 and pi is less than U is less than 3 pi over 2. Okay. So before I do A and B, I need to draw a triangle for U. So we need to remember what this symbolism means, and that's just telling you what quadrant you're in. So if our angle falls between falls between pi and 3 pi over 2, that's going to be quadrant 3. So we would draw quadrant 3. There's our U. All right, what we know about U is that the sine is negative 3/5. So the opposite is 3, the hypotenuse is 5. So that automatically means that the adjacent is 4. Now, to use all of the formulas, all of the half angle formulas, you need the cosine of U. Right? So in quadrant 3, cosine is negative. So cosine of U is negative 4/5. All right, so let's start answering the question. So first, we need to determine what quadrant half of U is in. So U is in quadrant 3. That doesn't mean that half of U is in quadrant 3. So what I do, because I could tell you if it's in this quadrant, half is in this quadrant for each of them. But I think it's easier, or you'll remember it more likely, if you just pick an angle in quadrant 3. All right, so an angle that you know for sure falls between 180 degrees and 270 degrees. All right, so an angle for me that falls in between there, this is pretty easy to take half of, is 200 degrees. So if we take half of 200 degrees, that's going to be 100 degrees, which is in quadrant 2. All right, we can pick any angle between 180 and 270 and take half of it, and that is going to be what we get. It will be in quadrant 2. So U over 2 lies in quadrant 2. All right, and if you want to write yourself a note, we just chose 200 degrees. When we took half of it, we got 100 degrees. That's in quadrant 2. And you only have to do one angle. I mean, you could check it with multiple if you wanted to, but it's going to work out. If you just pick one in that quadrant, take half of it, and it'll tell you the answer. All right, then for B, we're going to find the sine of U over 2. All right, so I will just go ahead. Let me get my formula. Go ahead and just write the formula. So the whole reason why we figured out A is so we would know if we either do a positive or a negative square root. So in quadrant 2, sine's positive, so we're going to do the positive square root of 1 minus cosine of U over 2. All right, we just wrote that the cosine of U is negative 4/5. So 1 minus negative 4/5 over 2 goes under the square root. Now we all know we don't do minus negative, we change it to plus positive. All right, and then we have this fraction inside of a fraction. I don't want this 5 right there. So what I would do is I would multiply by the 5. So this, and then I would do square root over square root, distribute the 5. And then that gives us the square root of 9 over the square root of 10. The square root of 9 is just 3. And then that's going to simplify to 3 square root of 10 over 10. That is the sine of half of U. All right. So what I want you to do for your assignment is on page 389, 33, 35, 37, 38, 42, and 44.